My name's David, and I used to be a cop. Now I work as a private investigator. I've been based out of Chicago for the past 14 years. I don't really want to get into the nitty-gritty of why I left the police force. I could fill a whole book with my feelings about the department. But honestly, I just felt like I wasn't appreciated enough. Back in 2010, I finally hung up my badge for good and shifted into the private sector to make a better living. The first few years I worked for different agencies, mainly running background checks, investigating insurance frauds, or doing asset searches for divorce lawyers and other legal folks. The pay was decent, but honestly, some of the jobs were so dull they actually made me nostalgic for my days in the force. I always had a soft spot for infidelity investigations, but let me tell you, that's a dirty, sad game, and I had my limits before I wanted out. Corporate investigations paid well, stuff like uncovering embezzlement or financial crime. What really got my blood pumping was finding missing people. When an old buddy from the force suggested I try missing persons cases, I was skeptical. I figured if someone goes missing and it's urgent, the police are the ones people turn to, not a private investigator like me. But as it turned out, not everyone wants the cops involved for countless reasons. The best example I can give is this woman who hired me to find her sister, who'd unfortunately gotten involved in street prostitution to pay off a drug debt. Bringing her off the streets and reuniting her with her family felt way more rewarding than any paycheck. Sure, money's nice, but if you can't look yourself in the mirror in the morning, what's it really worth? That's why I stuck with it. If there weren't any missing persons cases, I was working corporate jobs, which felt more like real detective work. But mostly, I did the former. The more cases I took on, the more I built a reputation as one of the best in the game. That's how I got a call from Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. I'd been recommended by someone who knew their family, a guy who used to run a program for vulnerable kids. I remembered them from previous chats about work, so I asked if they could meet in person. I always want to sit down face to face before committing to anything. They said they were free that afternoon, so a few hours later, I found myself in their living room, sipping tea, listening to them tell the story of their grandson, Mike. Mike was their grandson, and they hadn't heard from him in over a month. They'd looked after him since his parents died when he was just a boy, and they were really close. But then, a few months after he moved out to his own place in Wicker Park, he suddenly stopped answering his phone, and that wasn't like him at all. They got pretty worried that something bad had happened. They had some pictures of him, the address of his last job at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park, and a few details to help find him, like why they didn't want the police involved unless it was absolutely necessary. See, Mike was always aware of his parents' tragic death, but he'd never really wanted to know the gory details. But around his 19th birthday, he decided he needed the full story. His grandfather, sitting him down over some beers, told him how they'd been hit by a hit-and-run driver, how that driver just left them there to die. If that coward had stuck around and called an ambulance, maybe they'd still be alive. Instead, he took off, too scared of jail to do the right thing. Someone saw them lying there, bloodied and broken, and called an ambulance, but it was too late. Both his parents had succumbed by the time help arrived. Mike could handle hearing that, but the hit-and-run part was a different story. Connell and Maureen, that's his grandparents, said he'd been pretty down afterward, not acting like himself when he visited. They thought he might have been on drugs, but didn't want police getting involved if they could avoid it. They told me they'd never be able to live with themselves if he ended up in trouble with the law because of this. I had to agree. The odds of him ending up with a criminal record on a first offense were slim, but it could seriously hurt his chances of getting a good job or going to university. Their biggest concern: finding him before the police did. That's when I took a deposit, thanked them for the tea and cookies, and promised I'd find their grandson. First stop, the coffee shop where Mike used to work. I drove over to Lincoln Park, found the place, and asked the staff if they knew him. None of them did, but one girl quickly found out who I was asking about, and for a small purchase, she sat down to chat with me. She said Mike was an innocent kid, a little naive, and maybe got caught up in trouble because he didn't know much about London nightlife. But she told me that wasn't the Mike she knew. Turns out, he'd quit the coffee shop about 2 months before he vanished, after getting a new job elsewhere. And from her description of his behavior, he was no innocent, he was a party animal, always out late, drinking, dancing, chasing wild adventures. Apparently, Mike had been quite the libertine, far from the shy kid his grandparents portrayed. According to her, he'd been juggling multiple jobs, including working nights at a nightclub, a secret underground spot in Soho that only locals knew. One night, a manager there offered him a trial shift because he liked him so much, and that probably suited Mike better, shaking cocktails, chatting up patrons. It was sad, hearing he was leaving the coffee shop, but at the same time it made sense. After all, he was living the nightlife, and that's where the money was. The woman from the coffee shop was happy to help me after hearing Mike was missing. She told me the name of the club he was working at, and I headed over to Soho. The place didn't open until 9 at night, so I took a few hours to rest before heading back. When I arrived, the bouncer wouldn't let me in without a hefty £20 cover fee typical for such clubs. After some arguing, he finally called over a supervisor. She took one look at the picture of Mike I showed her and said she'd never seen him before. She was pretty snappy about it, too, turning on her heel and walking away before I could press her further. But I knew she was lying. When someone recognizes a picture, they usually hesitate, they look and think for a second. She did neither. She answered the moment I asked, and her face softened just a tiny bit to tell that she knew him. So why was she pretending not to? I paid the entrance fee, and I hung out a bit, hoping to get answers. I spent about half an hour at the bar, sampling some overpriced beer and chatting with people who approached. Some knew Mike, or at least he was familiar, while others acted cold, giving me the side-eye. I could tell the barmaid was wary of me, and I thought it was only a matter of time before she assigned the bouncer to toss me out. Instead, I asked her directly if I could speak to her manager. As soon as he came over, she snapped at him, whispering something about me bothering customers. I couldn't hear her, thanks to the loud music, but I saw him look my way. At first, I thought he'd just tell me to leave, but instead, he asked to see some credentials. Luckily, I carried my private eye card. It's a little expensive looking, and it always opens doors. I showed it to him, and he nodded, inviting me into his office for a quick chat. Turns out, I was right, he knew Mike well, and so did everyone working there. Mike was a favorite customer, and that's why the supervisor was so protective, claiming not to recognize him. They told me about the last time Mike and the supervisor interacted a couple of weeks earlier. He'd seemed different. Usually, he was the life of the party, full of energy and eager to mingle. But that day, he was quiet, sitting alone at the bar, saying he was waiting for someone. He seemed anxious, telling the bartender he was trying to settle something with whoever was coming. During that brief chat, he said he might not see her or her staff for a while and left shortly after. The manager added that the supervisor was on edge because just a few days earlier, someone came looking for Mike, a guy who'd never been there before. When she asked who he was, she'd claimed she didn't recognize him. The guy got defensive, demanding to know where Mike was, and finally left only after security escorted him out. The manager figured the supervisor thought I was just another threat looking for Mike, same as that guy. Everyone really cared about him. They'd be devastated if they knew he hadn't checked in with his grandparents. I offered to put the manager in touch with Connell and Marine for peace of mind. He declined, but thanked me for the gesture. He also guessed Mike might be hanging around Camden, where a regular at that bar, an ex-boyfriend or some old friend of Mike's, used to live. And that's how I realized Mike was involved in prostitution. This job, that night gig in Soho, is just a cover. The real money, night work in the sex trade, it's dangerous as you might imagine. You put yourself in risky situations almost every night, often dealing with shady characters, drug dealers, or angry clients. Mike could have rubbed someone the wrong way and ended up in debt with a pimp, a dealer, or just some overzealous punter. Maybe he went home with the wrong person and it got violent, or he simply got in too deep. The best I could hope for was that he'd found an older client or partner and was laying low. So I shifted my search to Camden, which wasn't the needle in a haystack I initially thought, especially since his last seen spots were the nightclub and the coffee shop. I spent 3 days poking around, talking to barflies at cafes, checking out pubs, and updating his grandparents. I didn't tell them the full extent of his nightlife, just that he'd taken his partying too far. The bad news was, I soon got a reliable lead from Mike's closest friend, the bartender from the Soho Club. Turns out, I was close. On that third day, I saw him. I sat in a coffee shop, wondering if I was wasting my time, when he walked in to pick up an order, not calling himself Mike, but Sean. I only recognized him because of the bleach blonde hair under his baseball cap. He wore sunglasses, but they weren't enough to hide his features from me after a week of watching. When he left, I started tailing him, keeping my distance, but following all the same. We moved down Camden High Street, then turned onto Pratt Street towards St. Martin's Gardens. I kept my eyes on him and saw him head down a path to a large, 3-story house. He knocked on the door, which was answered by an older man, his lover, no doubt. You could see the affection, and I was sure I'd found him. Mission accomplished. It was late in the afternoon, so I called Connell and Maureen, let them know they'd found their grandson. I asked if they wanted me to approach him or just keep tabs. They wanted me to watch for one more day, but to stay cautious. It seemed like he was in trouble or maybe hiding. We talked on speakerphone, weighing options. They decided to just have me monitor him until the next day, and I agreed. I parked a few houses away and stayed up all night, making sure Mike didn't go anywhere. In the morning, I ordered some food and coffee to my car, confident no one had entered or left that house. But just as I was about to call Connell and Maureen again, I got the automated message. The number you've dialed is not in service. I thought their phones might have died or they were out of town, so I waited about 15 minutes, then tried again. Same message. That made me nervous. It's not uncommon for scumbags to target family members to get to their victims. I had to check on him. I drove over to their house, parked outside, and knocked. When no one answered, a woman I'd never seen before came out. She seemed confused about who Connell and Maureen were. I explained I was there to see them, and after some back and forth, she remembered. Said she was house-sitting because they were on holiday. I was stunned. I'd just spoken to them the night before. She then said she had no idea what I was talking about, that she was just watching their house, and she was sorry she couldn't help. I left more confused than ever. I called their phones repeatedly, but still no answer. My gut told me something was wrong, especially since Connell's phone hadn't activated since that morning. Why would a guy pay to go on vacation right after I'd been hired to find his grandson? My stomach sank. I pondered my next move, the best course of action to protect everyone. I decided to warn Mike, get him out of there if he was in trouble. I drove back to Camden, took a shortcut down St. Martin's Gardens, and approached the house where I'd seen him go in. I rang the doorbell. It was too loud, so I knocked. The door creaked open slightly. My instinct screamed, something's wrong. I pushed it open, and the house was eerily quiet. I called out, searching room after room, until I reached the second-floor master bedroom. I pushed open the door, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Mike and his older partner, the one I'd suspected, was more than just a boyfriend, lay there on the bed. And they were mutilated. Blood everywhere. It was a slaughter. I could see they'd been dead for hours, maybe only a few, but definitely not long. I immediately called the police, waited at the scene, and relayed everything I knew, first to a uniformed officer, then to a detective. As soon as they confirmed it was a double murder, I didn't need to do fingerprinting. My old Met records had that covered. But I had to give a full statement about how I got involved. Weeks and months passed as I worked with detectives. The scene was a mess, no forced entry, no signs of other intruders, just those brutal stab wounds. They even checked the house for DNA, but it had been cleaned so thoroughly I doubted anything useful would turn up. The victim's lover, still a mystery. Mike himself was connected to a wealthy lawyer, someone with a lot of money who wanted his identity kept quiet so the media didn't catch wind. The case was buried quickly, as if someone important decided it was better left unseen. And me? I'd seen private cases that haunted me, but this was the one that stayed with me forever. I guess, in a way, Mike's story became my own weight, a constant reminder of how fragile and dangerous this line of work really is. I never did find out who was really behind it, who'd paid that husband to do what he did. The big corporation. Maybe, but no proof ever surfaced. I moved away after that, changed my name, started fresh. I take on little jobs now, mostly to stay afloat. I keep a camera hidden, watch from the sidelines, and avoid anything that smells too corporate or corrupt. The scars. They're still there, my jaw clicks when I eat, and I've got missing teeth that implants couldn't fully replace. Sometimes I still have nightmares about that night, the gunfire, the blood, the helplessness. I lost faith in ever catching the person responsible, but I keep going. I just live with it. No one ever found who hired the husband or who shot me, but I've got my guesses. Maybe it was that CFO, the one who seemed so slick. Maybe someone in that company wanted me silenced. Who knows? The company moves on. I'm just a guy who got too close and somehow I survived. That's enough for me.